What's happening with it?
Hello,
Hello?
everyone. We're live now. Sorry for keeping you, those who are on. Thank you
What's
for.
happening with it?
We're live,
Hello?
everyone. We're live now. Sorry for keeping you, those who are on. Thank. Hi, all. Thank you for joining us. We had a bit of a technical difficulty, as always, but happy Fridays and thank you for joining us again this evening. It's good to see everyone who's joined. Um, let's get started. You would have this is part two to the conversation that we had a couple of weeks. Oh, it's even more than a month ago now. Um, and we had such great feedback, loads of online conversations, loads of text messages and feedback from people that we thought we should come back and continue the conversation and maybe even narrow in a little bit more to the conversation. So here we are again this Friday evening. So before I go any further, I'm going to introduce to you the panel once again. You will be familiar with them, but it never hurts to just remind who we've got on the panel. So this evening we have Eddie Hypolite, who is a resilience and education consultant, pastor, and PhD candidate exploring how the concept of belonging can enhance the African diaspora students within the education system. We have Dr. Gifford Rhamie, a public scholar, consultant, and pastor. His doctoral research examines race, faith, and belonging in the British Academy through story of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8, using post-colonial studies to reveal hidden assumptions around Blackness and religious education. Then we have Dr. Val Bernard Allen, a lecturer in sociology and the founder of Black Women's Transformational Training. Her work explores faith, decolonial sensitivities, and the realities of involuntary singleness amongst Black women. We have Pastor Steve Hulbert, a local church pastor, an avid book reader, a follower of Jesus Christ, committed to reimagining faith communities as spaces that lead the way in healing social division rather than deepening them. And then we have Johnathan Holder, Pastor Johnathan Holder, a local church pastor and guest lecturer at Newbold College, currently a PhD candidate with a passion for pastoral studies and homiletics. So that's everyone who is joining us today. And so, welcome back to part two of the conversation that we started last month. And if you haven't listened to that one, I would say maybe go back and listen to it before you watch this one, because you might be wondering where we're starting from or why we're starting from where we're starting from. So, I'm going to give a little bit of context of where we're heading today. Last time we spoke about the church and the rise of Christian nationalism that we're seeing in America and coming to these shores. And as we wrapped up the conversation, we were starting to ask the question around decolonization, um, and why the church should really be leading when it comes to this, why it should be a place where voices of the marginalized are heard and where the least of these are centered, and not be another space where the powerful stay in control. But we also had to face some hard truths. Western colonialism has left such a deep mark on the church that even those of us who come from oppressed communities, even parts of the Black church, can end up repeating the same colonial patterns, patterns that devalue human dignity and water down the radical message of the gospel. So today we're going to go a bit deeper into that idea. What does decolonizing Christianity actually mean? Is it necessary? And how do we bring everyone into that journey? Our white brothers and sisters, our older Black, Asian, and Eastern family members who might not even see what the issue is. For me, decolonizing became real when I heard the term through Akala, the North London rapper. I know you're probably thinking, did I read it somewhere? No, I heard it through Akala, the London rapper who started the hip hop Shakespeare Company. He took Shakespeare, something that's seen as like an elite thing of the English culture, and reimagined it through hip hop. It was brilliant because it reclaimed something that was exclusive and white and made it belong to everyone. And I think when I think about it, that's exactly what God did through Jesus. He took the redemptive story that had been held tightly by religious elites and wrapped up in identity politics of Israel and the power struggles of Rome, and then he gave it back to humanity. In Jesus, God decolonized salvation itself. He broke the monopoly in grace. He gave it back to the ordinary people. And what empire tried to claim, Jesus reclaimed for everybody. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen with Christianity today. Because over time, Western colonialism hasn't just conquered lands, it attempted to conquer our imagination and our understanding of God. It's kind of fused faith and power, empire and hierarchy. And today we can see that same spirit showing up in Christian nationalism. This idea that Christianity should dominate and it's part of one's culture and national speciality, like some sort of chosen people of God, not in the way that the Bible intended it, but in some patriotic way. And empire is starting to cosplay as religion, if you haven't noticed. And so, if we don't do this hard work of decolonizing our faith, we can risk ending up with a Christianity that looks nothing like what Jesus Christ intended. And as I started to think about this, I had to be honest with myself. It started to hit close to home. There have been times when I've caught myself agreeing with bits of the nationalistic rhetoric. Maybe the talks around values of marriage and other values around order of society. And as I listen more, I realize that those Christian nationalists and I are not standing on the same ground, even though the rhetoric might sound familiar or something I might nod my head to. We are not standing on the same platform. And so I have felt convicted recently to continue the work of unlearning what I think I've absorbed without even realizing it. And maybe you sit and listen from the same perspective as me. And so that's why, again, I've invited these amazing intellectuals and people that I really trust and love and like to be part of this conversation because they know a lot more than I do. So that's where we're going to start today. How do we peel back the layers of empire that have wrapped themselves around our faith? How do we rediscover a Christianity that actually looks like and sounds like and loves like Jesus again? And so I'm going to start the conversation off with asking Johnathan. And again, guys, I'm not being disrespectful and not saying their titles. They have asked me to just refer to them as normal human beings. So I'm going to ask Johnathan, what does decolonizing mean to you personally? Do you relate to any of my sentiments? Yeah, what does it mean to you personally?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Lolly. I think I definitely do relate to some of your sentiments. I think, though, if I'm being honest about it, I probably haven't put it in the language of decolonization. I think two things really for me. One thing, I've always been taught just to kind of question why we do things. And I think that's a really important part of decolonization, asking the questions of why do we do that? Why is it this way? Why do we say that this is good and this is bad? And also just recognizing, I think, the power of culture and sometimes how in our Christianity we have allowed some cultures and some ways of working. And I guess the easiest way probably to talk about it, especially within the UK context, is in terms of music. How some cultures have, or some music has been seen as more superior or more holy and things like that. And so I would say, just as two ways to start. One, asking questions of my faith, and also just thinking about are there cultural things which have almost become Christian things, and recognizing why has that happened and really asking questions about that. That's where I'd say I probably start for myself.
So say that again. How have Christian things become, say that bit again?
How have cultural things then become Christian things?
Okay. So is there anything more recently that you would say you've been like, didn't realize that that's just a cultural thing and now it's become a Christian thing?
I guess more recently, and I have to be careful about how I say it. Like,
Don't be careful, that's boring.
no, but it so as a pastor, I think I'm dealing with it all the time.
Okay.
And I'm dealing with it in my churches in terms of things that people get really upset about, or they want to talk about, or they're really concerned about. So, like, a big thing in some of the churches that I pastor and have pastored in the past has always been dress. So what's
Oh, mm.
not appropriate? And I would say that's probably a big aspect of colonization where we really struggle in terms of
How
feeling.
so?
Yeah,
Say more.
oh, well, I would say probably hairstyles, jewelry, or even just even as basic. So I guess in a lot of my churches, the standard attire for coming to church is a suit.
Okay.
Like if you don't wear a suit, something's wrong. And so, or even beyond wearing a suit, you've got to be wearing a tie. So I did communion at one of my churches, which is kind of more traditional, a couple of months ago, in a black collarless shirt. And I think no one said anything to me then, but after the communion, people were talking about it, making comments, and even talking about ways I've dressed previously, where they're like, "Oh, actually,
I had a list.
yeah, well, yeah, people always have a list and stuff." So I think that's one aspect.
So, Jonathan, are you saying that in that example, formal attire is colonial?
Yeah, I think in some senses. So again, I've had the privilege of doing a bit of traveling, but if you go to different parts of the world, I guess some countries. So I went to Swaziland, now Eswatini, and I remember worshiping there, and it's hot, and then you still got people there in full two, three-piece suits on a Sabbath morning, and it doesn't make sense. And so I would say that's a really easy example of how what is appropriate for Christians and how Christians should look or act hasn't come through, and that's colonialization.
There's the colonial perspective is that for the house of God, you should be in formal attire, and that was spread across
No, not even formal Western attire.
comfortable, oh, formal Western attire. Okay.
Yeah,
But
because I
that's interesting. Well, but even if you go to, we haven't got anyone here from West Africa, but if you go to West African churches, they will wear formal Ghanaian attire to church. So it's not just even there is, and they were colonized at some point. So it's they even when they've gone back to wearing more traditional, it's still formal. So that's just how deep it's become, right? It's like you have to wear your Sunday best, your Sabbath best.
yeah.
I think,
Yeah, go for it, Ed.
sorry, Jonathan, was he going to say something?
No, 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 I'm fine.
Okay.
Feel free to
I
come.
think one of the I think one of the problems with colonialism is that it assumes that only Western formal traditions are formal traditions, and it assumes that within African countries that they don't have formal dress and casual dress and dress for state functions and dress for just chilling with your friends. Within the culture, there is already an established idea of what dress is. So, whether you're going to a Christian church or whether you're going to an ancestral temple, they will still have there's still ideas of formality of how that looks. I remember the first time I went to South Africa and we went to, in 98, and we went to this youth event called Stassa. And I remember we was all standing outside as preachers. There's a bunch of us as pastors waiting to go inside, place, pack up inside. And we're standing up there and it's January, so it's midsummer, standing up there, suited and booted. There were these two white American pastors standing up there in a like soft chino slacks, pair of kind of slippers, linen shirts, short sleeve linen shirts. And one of the pastors, he actually said it loud enough for them to hear it. He said, "Huh, when they came to our country, they told us to dress like this. Now they come back and they dress like that." And that's right there. That's colonization. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Right there, right there. Giving a standard, but not feeling that you have to adhere to that standard because you change your practice. You know, and colonization always decides for the colonized what is right, but doesn't keep those same standards for themselves. And they move on. They move
So
on.
what does colonization when decolonization, when you think about it, what is it for you, Eddie, when you think about how that should work? what that
I
looks like.
think decolonization for me is not second guessing everything that colonization has made me feel is wrong about the way I worship, about the way I present in the world,
Mm.
about the way I think about God, about the way I even preach. You know,
Mm.
I have been declared for many years, many years. I have been declared a preacher of low and no substance because because I talk about Jesus and love too much, you know. But as I read the Bible and I read this God who is in the Bible, well, that's what I see, a God who operates from love. And throughout the Old and New Testament, you know, Jesus is a reflection of that. You know, Jesus is
A
a
really
reflection of that.
interesting point, Eddie, because are you saying that a decolonized view of God is one that is loving and one that's a colonized is what kind of God then?
Well, I mean, I mean, you think about the way in which um, God was brought to colonize places. I used
Mm.
to be the pastor of Avondale University Church. I was their pastor. And I remember once I was preaching there one Saturday morning, and I was talking about the way in which we bring our own self into the scripture and we bring ourselves culturally into the scripture. And I said to them, my congregation, obviously, it's a 99% white academic community. And I said, you know, when people who look like you came to places where people who look like me lived, you never taught us the gospel. You taught us a culture.
Mm.
And you taught us to maintain it. But what you never did was come back to us afterwards and say, listen, you see all that stuff we said to you, you might need to rethink it because we went home, tried it with our children, and none of our kids go to church anymore. You know,
And
what you did.
what is, if you could say what that is in a
Well,
nutshell,
I think what that is, it's an idea of performative. It's an idea. I remember Val used this phrase once I loved, and it's the idea of just civility. Everything is just wrapped and protected by this idea of civility. You know, so how you look, how you think, how you dress, how you worship, how you present in the world,
what that sounds,
without without the assumption that within their cultures they know how to do that. You know, it's
yeah.
interesting. Um, Weeks later, an old missionary, past president of one of our missionary came to me, having done so much work in the South Pacific. He said, you know, Eddie, I've been thinking about what you said, and it's been on my mind for years, years. And then he said this, he said, I realized that we got it all wrong back then. He said, I wish we would have just taught people the gospel and left them to figure it out.
I know exactly what you're talking about because I think you said it in a sermon
You know,
recently.
and left them to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that is the idea of colonialism. Colonialism assumes that within a culture there is nothing in terms of their cultural knowledge, their cultural wisdom, their
Yeah.
cultural practice. There is nothing that would actually attach them to God in any meaningful way,
Mm.
because wisdom is with us and wisdom isn't with you. You know
That
what I
is,
mean? We are the thinkers, you are the feelers and the receivers of wisdom, but you are not the producers of your own wisdom.
I think in what you're saying, I'm hearing two things that the decolonized God is one that is full of love and respect, and the
Mhm.
colonizing God is one of control and judgment solely because you're controlling how people dress, you're controlling how people behave, you're trying to make them, and the control is contained in this very small view of what civilized is. So the Africans, the Native Americans, the Asians are savage and need to be civilized and controlled by a god who uses these Western colonial vessels to do that.
Well, up front, you know, if you look at the history of colonization, governments send in the church and they send in missionaries and they do the front work. You know, they almost doing recon. They're doing spiritual recon for colonizing country. They send in the church and they've sent in the missionaries with the burden, the white burden of civilizing as it were, the savage. And so, yeah, the church has always been used, and God has been used as a weapon, as a blunt instrument.
Yeah, God's
As
been
a
used as
blunt
a
instrument,
weapon.
you know, as you know, the Bible has been used as a blunt instrument.
Yeah, I
And so
really.
God has literally had to reintroduce himself. The idea of decolonization is the idea of God reintroducing himself, almost for me saying, oh, listen, sorry about that introduction back there. Let me
Yeah.
reintroduce myself,
But
you
that
know.
is exactly what God does when Israel come out of Egypt and he has to rename himself. He literally says, I am Yahweh, because they only know God as the oppressor that he's almost like he acknowledges what they've been through in Egypt and he says, I'm Yahweh. Would anyone else want to add what decolonization means to them personally, maybe share a personal revelation that they've had or
Yeah, I'd like to just add, like, I think what hasn't been hit on yet, is that how much colonization permeates everything.
Hmm.
And so, like, while we're acknowledging that it exists, I don't think we're quite yet have acknowledged how much it exists. And so, colonization isn't just about taking land, and then living in it. It's more than that. It's a full control of the space that those who are colonizing are in. And so, it's already been mentioned by Eddie that, that involves religion. We're sending religion in as an element of preparing the land. Education, which walks hand in hand with religion, is sent in to prepare the land. And then language as well. The native languages are viewed as barbaric, and you're lesser than if you're using that language, and so you start using the language of the colonizer, and that becomes your language. And then there's social hierarchy as well, and so depending on the complexion of your skin, you're going to be in a better position in the colonialized society that you now find yourself in. And then there's the whole cultural bit that we've addressed as well. The eventually the native culture gets weaned out, and what becomes the normal is the colonizers' culture. That becomes normal to the extent where you don't even think of it as normal. It just is the normal for you. And then you start speaking about things within terms of colonization, not realizing it's colonized language, because that has become the new normal. And so, decolonization then recognizes that those patterns didn't disappear when empires ended. That's what decolonization recognizes. Empire ends, but the actual colonization, the way we talk, the way we think, the way we address things, the way we do theology, all of those things are still colonized. And that's where decolonization comes in to address it.
wow. Val, please.
Yeah, thank you for your contributions. Very interesting, and yeah, I want to just take it forward by just saying, or adding to the conversation by centering for me, what colonization means and decolonization. And so I speak from the standpoint of African descended womanhood, and how, as part of the colonial project, the gendered relationships that were expressed and are expressed are a reflection of the negative aspects of colonization. Because in fact, some people would say that there are some positive aspects to colonization, depending on what side of the fence that you stand. But in terms of the work that I do with Black women of African descent and what they bring to the table, you can really see the violations, the gendered violations that they have, that's in their gendered identity memory. Because as Steve was saying, the empire may have gone, but the memory, those seeds have been planted, and they're still being generated, they're still being watered. And the way in which African descended women speak about their lives, or how we speak about our lives, really needs to have more of a central place in the conversation around colonialism and decoloniality, because you know, the least of these, the principle of the least of these, and how the idea of whoever is least in a space has a particular expertise that needs to come, you know, needs to be part of the conversation. And so it's, for me, it's the way that Black women's bodies are viewed, how it's used, how it's seen aesthetically, what that means for them in terms of employment, in terms of marriage, in terms of belonging, what that means in terms of trauma, lived trauma, walking, you know, actually inhabiting a body that in the hierarchy that coloniality brought to the table positions African descended bodies as the least valuable in terms of maybe not in terms of hard labor and work, but in terms of everything else, which is where they do all the kind of nurturing and the mothering, you know, the way that their bodies were used to feed other people's children. And that continues in very interesting ways in 2025. So it's about centering their stories, their experiences, to shed light on misrecognized aspects of colonialism.
You've mentioned one example about being wet nurses for children that aren't even the same race as you. But could you give an example of how that might show up now for someone, if you know, just to really make it vivid in the minds of those who
right. So societies always have regimes. They always have structure. They have structures and they have patterns. And those patterns can, as we're discussing, you know, the seeds that were set hundreds of years ago. I would say even from the 7th century, when Africa started to be colonized by, you know, with Islam, etc. But these patterns endure, right? They continue. They wear different clothes. So, for example, if you look at the gendered relationships between Black men and women 400 or 500 years ago, the distance between them continues in 2025. And an aspect of that distance, as it relates to nursing, is the way that women, you know, certain spaces are feminized. So areas of society which requires feeding, you know, caring. This is where you're going to find Black women, even if they are CEOs of an organization or whatever. They tend to be in those, you know, because these are the spaces that society allowed that trajectory to continue. And these are the spaces where they have filled and they have grown and they have contributed in these spaces in incredible ways. But just to be really critical of it, it's the space that's been allowed to express their gendered work. And it does come from memories, society's memories about where Black women should be placed, or men, or where white men should be placed, or white women or Asian women. Those memories continue, and those arrangements continue to be expressed until we begin to really shed light on them and critique them and start asking those difficult questions about why.
What's really interesting about what you said, so if I'm understanding correctly, it's that Black women maybe are not forced, maybe forced into those kinds of spaces, regardless of if it's something they want to do or like to do or feel passionate about doing, more than other women might do. But then I'm thinking about in the church context, people then have a reading of the word of God that suggests that that is exactly what women should be doing. Like they should be in those spaces because they have the things that feed children. They have the anatomy that does that. They, you know, they are more nurturing. So how do we, like, someone asked a question on YouTube, like, if everything is so entwined, how on earth do we start this process of, like, is it even possible to even think about it? Like, we want to be critical, like you said, having a critical eye, but why should we, where do we start?
So we start in conversations. We start in those very difficult conversations to begin to be honest. And those are the things that we bring to prayer as well. This is why these things can be part of the Christian experience. We bring the increasing revelations to prayer. And of course, what you said about women being, some people would say, women are wired in that way. You know, I'm a mother, you know, so that of course there are aspects to it which are true. which is one of the subtleties of colonization, isn't it? Or the subtleties of oppression, but it's about the over amplification of that identity and the way in which it's bound and contained and constrained to the extent that the diversity of women are not allowed to be expressed. So, and so society, and also people collude with their identities. All of us, we all collude and participate in the reproduction of our identities for so many different reasons. And that's what enables society to keep going in a particular way, for many, many generations. It is because we collude. And so society is not just something outside of ourselves. It's something that we constantly participate in its reproduction.
Yes,
We
I get
participate
it.
in the process.
I love that word collude, because I feel like I've been colluding a lot. And I'm like, I really don't want to. So I've been saying to God, like, show me, like, is this me? There's a very disclosure. There's a part of me that's a bit people pleasing, and I really don't want to be seen as the angry Black woman. So even when I'm angry, I minimize it. And I've been colluding, which only takes you so far until you start getting ill because you've been colluding so much.
Absolutely.
I laugh because otherwise I'd cry. But
absolutely. And in closing, I'll say that one scholar, she claims that Black women, African descended women, need to begin to explore what vulnerability is like. I think I may have said this in the last talk. That vulnerability needs to provide a space for Black women to begin to contest the way in which they've been, they're the strong Black woman and they hold up the church and nurture communities and nurture their men, and all at the expense of their own.
Yeah.
And like mental health, all the research around Black women and mental health, because the strong Black woman discourse. It's these kinds of things. So you're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Sure.
Certainly, we have to look.
Yeah, I think exactly that. I like that. We have to look. Gifford, is there anything else that you would add to, especially of the work that you've done with decolonising the Axe story? I mean, there must be.
Yeah, there's so much, isn't there? And so much has been said as well. I think of the line that Bob Marley sings in Redemption Song, we've got to emancipate our minds from mental slavery. And basically he's talking about decolonizing there, isn't he? The process of undoing the lasting effects of colonialism. And the lasting effects of colonialism reaches through the way we think, the way we know, the way we are, our being, the political structures that we're in and under, and how does a decolonial space look like in light of these? And that's why the question about if colonization is so indelibly intertwined with religion, how is it how really possible it is it rather to decolonize it? I think also one way is to think of the fact that it wasn't always like this. And while decolonizing is not meant necessarily to reach back to an idealistic, idyllic past that predates the time of colonialism, we can understand that there are ways of knowing, ways of being, political structures that can be peeled back to reveal something new. And even with the peeling back, whatever we do produce by way of practice between genders, by way of practice morally in church, it's going to look different, and it must look different to what predated the period of colonialism, and that's an inevitability. And so what I think the genius of a couple of strands of Christianity, what I would say Adventism, is that because we held ourselves to accountable to the Old Testament ways of knowing, the Old Testament ways of being, there is a golden thread that speaks to an Afro-Asiatic sensibility that African descended people are in touch with, even in the diaspora. And that is a way of knowing holistically, meaning the physical, the spiritual, the mental, and the social are all intertwined and inseparably bound and are all one. And this is very different rather to the later Greco-Roman ways of knowing and being, which was a very dualistic Cartesian way. And that is everything is separate. And so because of their separate, they are in opposition to one another. So
give an example of that to really help people
get
how that in practice, in practice.
So for example, in Greco-Roman thinking, the secular and the sacred are separate. And so what we do religiously, what we do by way of faith, is in opposition to what we do in terms of secular activities.
How is that different?
Whereas in Hebrew thinking, it is one, the sacred and the secular are one, meaning that all activities we do are laced with spiritual import, spiritual significance, spiritual consequence as well. And whether we're talking about sex, whether we're talking about going to work, whether we're talking about harvesting, whether we're talking about going shopping, whether we're talking about the Sabbath, whether we're talking about the 6 days of the week, in the Hebrew mindset and the Hebrew ways of knowing, it is all intertwined, it is all one. And that reality has been passed down to the genes of Adventism. And I think it's something that fundamentalism tried to squeeze out, but it's something that I think gives us hope.
So maybe I'm being really simplistic here. So if we use that example of the Hebrew view of sacred and secular and then the Roman view, I feel opposite. I feel like Adventism has become more Roman. And for instance, if you talk about a wedding, if you're the Hebrew perspective, you have your wedding, you have your reception, you have a nice little shake a leg, and that is to the glory of God. But I grew up with Adventist weddings being the church, the food, and we go home without having no shake a leg until my family were like, we're not coming to any wedding where there's no shake a leg. So I feel like, maybe I'm being simplistic here, that somehow in the Adventist context, we have lost that Hebrew, even though our theology and the way we practice our faith might feel less dualistic in the church walls on a Sabbath. But when we look at the rest of our lives, we get very Roman with it.
No, you're right. In practice, we have taken on a very strongly affected colonial Christianity, and but my point was that if you look at the early pioneers and the way they thought and the way they wrote and the way they expressed faith, that is closer to the Hebrew way of thinking and knowing than the way it has been exported or developed over time. And we haven't got time in this space, and it's probably not the best place to rehearse why that happened and how that happened, because there is a way that happened in the 20th century in particular. But and so what I'm trying to say is that there are aspects of our tradition that we can perhaps unpeel, find the golden thread, and see, yes, there is continuity between what God has been trying to teach us through the biblical canon, through the past 2,000 years, albeit refracted through Adventism, a kind of Adventism that itself needs to be unpeeled and undone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that leads us on to it. We acknowledge that the work of decolonizing Christianity is a really hard one, but it is worthwhile because of how damaging it has been, not just to the colonized, but to the colonizer, as Eddie put perfectly in the first episode, how it dehumanizes them when they were colonizing others. And then, so as we move on, if it is a worthwhile task, then Jesus, as Christians, Jesus really is, his message, his life really seems to be the best tool to use. So how might the life and the message of Christ shape how we even approach this decolonizing process? Right? How might, who wants to go first?
In the bridge crossing to
Yeah.
that, it's probably important to kind of point out what decolonization is not.
Mm,
So, decolonization isn't about, destroying traditions. It's just about opening up the space so
more.
that other traditions can enter in. And there not being this battle about like this is the holy tradition that has, like, so I mean sometimes it might mean reshaping tradition,
Sure.
but it's not about destroying, because they're quite often when that word is used, people already have in their mind a picture of what, okay, this is what you're talking about. So it's also not about hating white people.
Sure.
Some people automatically think as soon as that term is used, like, oh yeah, you're just going to be bashing white people. I mean, yes, predominantly because majority of white people did the colonization, but that doesn't mean that that's not the impetus behind it. It's about making the space wider so that
Mhm.
other people can be part of the story. And it's not about rejecting Christianity. Because Christianity was doing very well long before it became Western Christianity. Christianity was in Africa, it was in the Middle East. I mean, it came from those places. It was in India, it was in Persia, it was even in China and Central Asia. It was in all those places long before it came anywhere near established in the Western world.
Mhm.
And then it's also not about rewriting the gospel. It's just about opening our eyes to what is the gospel actually saying, and us being honest with the lens that we use when we're reading it.
I mean, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I'm just saying all that to then go into this question that you have asked.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the
Yeah.
bridge. I really appreciate the bridge for you to say like what it's not is really helpful, because you are acknowledging that there are people that are going to hear it differently. Val, you were going to add something there. No, not sure if you're going to add anything.
I was thinking I want to hear if Jonathan's going to say anything. Let me wait on a bit. I wasn't sure if he wanted to say.
Jonathan, were you going to say something?
No, not really.
You're going to have to say something now.
Because I think probably moving towards that second question, I think probably one of the first things we have to think about in terms of the life and message of Jesus is how we think about power, and what it means. Because I think part of what's happened in colonization is it's always been about a quest for power, and to be in charge and to be able to dictate and to be able to tell people this is how things must go. And I think what you see in the life of Jesus is a rejection of that kind of power. And I think that's probably where we have to start when we're thinking about Jesus.
Power. Anyone wants to say more about, I mean, Jesus comes in, born in a stable. His life begins as like the least of these. He lives a particular life of drifting around with a group of unsightly men and women. I don't know how many people want to live that kind of life, but anyone want to say more about this power, Val?
Yeah, just to then connect to what Johnathan said with Steve's last comments, like a developing white perspective. I think that the idea of the least of these is really fundamental to, as you said, Lolly, with the way that Christ has mapped out how we should deal with empire. He tells us that the kingdom of God is within us. And for any human being to embrace that truth is truly true liberation. So this is not about institutionalized, oppressed external systems or internal regimes of oppression, but it's about true autonomy and vulnerability before God and having total access to the Holy Spirit, all right, to guide us. But as part of that, this idea of the least of these is an opportunity for us to experience that. And one of the ways that it might be expressed is, as I said before, centralizing the least of these in any kind of community. So within kind of colonial context, if I was to just think about the gendered order globally and across history, and who's, in terms of colonization, who's at the top of the castle, white Caucasian male, and then who's at the bottom, you might want to say African descended colonized post-enslaved woman. All right, if we're going to have a hierarchy. So what does theologies theologies have developed from a white, Western theology, from a white male perspective, okay, even though we've had the African context, etc. But the theologies that surrounds us is very much a white generalized male perspective. So what do African descended post-enslaved women, Christian women, bring to the table? How have they navigated their lives through Christ? And what expertise is in there to support other people, i.e. those who are the children of the colonizers? Because we say they, but they are the children of the colonizers. And many of us are the children of colonizers because we're of dual heritage. Nearly everybody's got a great-grandfather from Scotland or Ireland or whatever. So in that sense, we're all meshed up. But the Black female body or woman's body and her experience and her expertise can be a point of greater understanding and also healing. There is insight in there because they navigate an uncomfortable space. So as people are dealing with their decolonizing experiences and feeling uncomfortable about it, they can be taught through a Black woman's experience, for example, as least of these, how to hold that uncomfortableness, but still rely on God, which is, my work. That is what Black women do every day. They step out into uncomfortable spaces where they are seen as less than, or they experience their lives as less than, and they cling to the cross. They cling to Christ, which is expressed in womanist theology. They cling to Christ, and that is some incredible practical expertise. That's theology. That is theology in lived theology that I feel has been misrecognized, and the potential behind that for me is really great.
Thank you for bringing that perspective. As I'm hearing about the power being the least of these versus the power, I wonder if the Western colonizers and those who are born of them recognize how much power they actually hold, or if they think it's neutral. And why I think that is because as soon as you start to change any of this and create a bigger capacity and space for different voices, different perspectives, different traditions, it's going to feel like the power has been taken. I don't know if they're going to recognize it as that, but that's what it's going to feel like. So if we think about, again, Jesus and the way that Jesus approached it, what kind of, how do we hold the community together and have that conversation? Like, what does Jesus offer us? Am I making myself clear? Have I just made things a lot more confusing?
Well, as the white male in the room,
Oh, you don't, I mean, really? You just thought you were really light-skinned. Speak for all whites, Stephen.
Yeah, I will speak for all the white people on earth and tell you that no, I walk into spaces and I recognize the authority that people give me. You know, I recognize that when I'm speaking in the space, I am speaking to people that are giving me an honor I've not earned. And I see that in spaces, and maybe being aware of that has made it more obvious to me when I'm in those spaces.
Right. Become aware of it. It's just all the reading you've been doing.
Probably, yeah, and listening. It's not just reading. It's like it's actually it's having good friends like people on this panel, that you have conversations with and you talk about and you listen to stories and experiences and you recognize that, good friends of mine who walk into similar spaces and are not listened to. You're like, oh, well, why does that happen for them and not for me? Why is someone always speaking over, that woman of color? But when I speak, the room is silent. Why is that happening? So it's about recognizing those spaces and to be honest, I don't think people that are doing deconstruction should apologize for how that might make some in power uncomfortable. Where some might lose some of that authority that they haven't earned necessarily. They just have it because of the pigment of their skin. I don't think being in uncomfortable spaces is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I think we have to. Christianity has always been about serving and sacrifice. It's always been about that. And so maybe it's some other people within the world of Christianity's turn to be of service and make a sacrifice.
Yeah. And even as you said that, I think it creates, I'm thinking about my liberal friends who are English, Scottish, Welsh, who would more likely become part of the Christian community because of creating space for others. I think they would come in and be like, I'm not like they would see the power struggles and the racism very clearly, and wouldn't want to be a part of it. But if the church became more of a safe space for everyone, as white people, they would feel more comfortable to join it because it would fit with their identity as being they consider themselves maybe liberal, right? So I think it opens doors for different kinds of people, is what I'm saying. You might lose some, and actually you create space for maybe a lot more. Not trying to kick anyone out of the kingdom, guys. Just being clear.
But what makes that important, though, in the context of this question of, the life and message of Jesus,
Yeah.
is that, we find Jesus in the margins. We find him in the places where there isn't the power. That's where we find him. Yeah, he does occasionally talk to the odd Roman soldier and things like that, but that's like a unique situation in the Jesus story. Like there aren't Roman soldiers all the time that Jesus is hanging out with. He's not in the palaces and the places, like he's in the margins and he's listening to the people within those margins. And so the question for us, if we're being honest Jesus followers, is are we listening and trusting the testimony of those in the margins? Are we doing that? Are we learning our theology from those who suffer? Are we doing that? Are we reading scripture to understand the underside of history? You know, are we doing those things as honest followers of God? Because if that's where we find God, then surely that's where we also learn from God.
I mean, this sounds so much like of what Eddie, when he was my pastor, would preach about, you know, this kind of Jesus, the Jesus of the margins, the Jesus who cared for the least of these, this loving, which for me was mind-blowing as a young person, because I just knew a very judgmental God who would happily, you know, send fire and lightning to my house because I, you know, wasn't as perfect as I should be. So Eddie, just bouncing off of what Stephen said, like in your experience of preaching this message of the life of Christ, is there anything else that you would add about how Christ's message and the life that he lived can help to reshape how we do and live a Christian life?
Funny enough, just listening to Steve just lay out, it just becomes apparent that, you know, the theology that we do is the theology that undoes what colonialism did, which is giving people back their autonomy, giving back people their power. But the power is used transformatively. The power is not used oppressively. You know, giving back people their sense of giving back people their sense of humanity, and allowing their humanity to allowing their humanity to do the theology, you know, as Val said, that their experience has become their expertise. Their experience has become their expertise.
That's
And
really, I'm sorry to pause you there. Their experience becomes a, so you're saying the hermeneutic, to use a, you'd be very proud of me, Dr. Gifford, to use their hermeneutical lens would be to use their experience as the lens. But isn't that dangerous, Pastor Eddie, to use your experience? Can't we
well, I've got,
can
I've
we
got,
not?
I've got. If you used to look on my bookshelf down there, I've got about 15, about 15 different Bibles, and in
Yeah,
every single one of them Bibles, those people are writing from their experience of
100%.
God.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're not
But
sitting
that's what
down. They're
people
not
think,
sitting
though.
down as secretaries saying, "Yes, speak again." What? No, hold on. What did you say? They're not. You know, God moves. They experience it. They write it, and they give it to us, and they say, "Yeah,
A
this is
hundred
what we
percent.
experience." You
But
know, and so yeah, our lived experience. You know, all of us. You know, you hear Val talk about the impact of her father and her mother, and then you realize, oh, that's where you learn God. And then you went on and you read books. You know, you listen to Gifford. You listen to Gifford talk about his nan and then his mum. Gifford starts faith with his grandmother. Then he starts with his mum and then with his dad. And then you're like, oh, all right. So that's where you learn God. And then you went ahead and read books. You know what I mean? Everything I know about how God acts in actuality, I learned from my mother before I read a book. I got to seminary and I'm like, oh, all right. So that's what mom was talking about. So
yes.
yeah, our experience, our experiences are central to the way in which we think about that. And I think that if we look at Jesus, Jesus gives people back. Jesus, Jesus gives people back the power of their humanity.
What made you emotional?
Sees what Jesus sees what the temple does. When Jesus says to the woman, neither do I condemn you, he gives her back her humanity. He gives her back her humanity. When he says, go, go, and listen, behave yourself, she behaves herself. You know what I mean? When Jesus says to Zacchaeus, come down, man, I was actually coming to your house, he's giving him back his humanity. You know, when Jesus says to Levi, yeah, follow me. No, 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 leave all that tax collecting, follow me. He's giving people back their humanity and what they do in return. You know, I've always loved the story of the calling of Matthew. He calls him from that table of isolation, and then Matthew holds a party, invites Jesus to that table, creates a table, and then everybody who's been isolated and lived the life of isolation that Levi lived, Matthew lived, he invites everybody to that table where Jesus is. And I think that that's the power that that's the power, you know, bouncing off of what Johnathan said, that's the power that colonialism takes from us. And then that's the power that the kingdom gives back to us. Because the power that the kingdom gives to us is the power to put everybody back in their humanity. Because colonialism is a dehumanizer. It dehumanizes. If you take away people's, as Steve laid out so beautifully and so clearly, what it does, it's not just taking the land, it's taking their wisdom, it's taking their education, it's erasing all of this. But the kingdom gives it back. And then the kingdom says, all right, as I've done, all right, you go and do. Give people back their humanity. Let them know that God is at the center, you know. And I think that that is the Jesus. That is the Jesus that presents himself. And I think that as Christian nationalism and all these ideas, these versions of Jesus is presenting itself to us as the idea of how Jesus is, I think it's becoming easier and easier to just look at the Gospels and like, all right, one of you is lying, but I don't think it's that I don't think it's that first century rabbi. Yeah, somebody's lying here. You know what I mean? Yeah, somebody's lying. I don't think it's that first century rabbi.
Can I jump in?
Johnathan, just before you come in, I just wanted to acknowledge Eddie, where you got a little bit emotional. I think I saw that, and it really touched me because I think what I was seeing in what you were sharing, what I felt was that colonialism has a way of making you feel like your humanity is rubbish, like it's nothing. Like my Caribbeanness, the fact that my family like to joke and dance and do feel like that's like depraved, and actually when you really get to know Christ, and that was my experience through your ministry, was that when you really introduced Christ, I was like, oh no, that's Christ in my family. Like our humor and our ability to make sad situations a bit of a joke to kind of survive is the grace of God. Like I got to see Christ in my blackness and my Grenadianism. You're Grenadian too, so my Grenadianism. And I think I don't think I had that until you mentioned it there, and I saw the bit of the emotion, is that I didn't realize the damage that colonialism was even doing to me, that the things that are Lolly, Fontaine, the Rodney side, are human and beautiful and graced by God.
And it was an immediate reminder for me. It was an immediate reminder for me, again, of like, oh, yeah, that's what God is doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And feeling it. I'm like, oh, all right, yeah. That's what He's doing. Yeah. Sorry to jump in on you, Johnathan.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that, Eddie. Go for it, Johnathan.
Yeah, so I think just hearing everybody talking just on this question, I think has kind of solidified for me that when we're talking about colonialism and what colonialism has done, it's really said God can be found here, but he can't be found there. Like, that's been the basic problem and issue of colonialism, that there are certain places where God is accessible and certain places where he's inaccessible. And decolonizing and what you see in Jesus is this idea that actually, no, God is in and with people who you wouldn't expect to see him in. Right. And places where you wouldn't expect him to be. So, as an example, if you talk to my wife the last couple of weeks, she would have told you that since it came out, I've kind of been obsessed with Dave's new album, The Boy Who Played the Harp.
I didn't know he has a new album out.
It's amazing. I think it's actually amazing. But what's really interesting is that it speaks from a place that even as a Black man, I would have to admit I can't speak from, because that's not my experience. But I think the way he is speaking is, I'm going to say it's spiritual, just in terms of he is speaking his life experience and what he knows in the best way he knows. And it was really interesting because I think that's the thing about decolonization. So I listened to Dave's new album numerous times, and it didn't make me want to be a rapper. But what it made me want to do is to be a better preacher. And I think that's also part of this idea about decolonizing, recognizing that God can work and does work and inspires in different places and in different ways, and that it's not just in church or when you're sitting down and reading your, but like what colonization has done is limited how God can be mediated.
I was going to say, so the colonizers, Western colonization suggested that God could only speak and move through.
Yeah, so Western colonization, and then I would say even in the ways we like read the Old Testament. So even in the ways we read the Bible. So yes, I guess Gifford kind of explained that it's different in the Old Testament. But one thing it really got me thinking is, okay, even if it's different, would what Israel did when they entered the Promised Land be called colonization? Like, would that be different? And again, I realize that's also about how I've been taught to think. And so it's not just about recognizing the different ways of thinking, but it's recognizing even in the ways in which I read the Bible, whichever part I'm reading it from this perspective of power and of God is only visible here. And I think that's something which affects us even to this day in whatever Christianity we belong to. There are places where God is, and there are places where God isn't. And what we discover from Jesus is actually, no, that's not true. But that's also really uncomfortable for us, because if God is present in places which we're not, so someone once said this, and I forgot who said it, but it's just the idea that God will always be somewhere and doing something that you personally would be uncomfortable with. And for me, if he isn't involved in that, then he can't really be God. Like, he's just a bigger version of you. And so I think that's also what we have to understand and learn when we're thinking about colonization, that it's about decolonizing is about recognizing that actually God is in places where people in the past have said he isn't, and you can't access him here, and you have to stay away from that. Now, obviously, there are always things which aren't positive and which aren't, but God is not limited in the way we've tried to limit him.
Yeah, and I think Val mentioned this last time, the work of the Holy Spirit, because I feel like colonization, and maybe I'm going too far with this, has kind of minimized the role of the Holy Spirit. Like, power comes through this particular hierarchy, and I have no access to God. And I think Adventism has, maybe, talk about our denomination, maybe more problematic in that, because I don't remember being really discipled to hear the voice of God for myself or to experience the Holy Spirit, not in a charismatic way, but just in the way that Jesus talks about how we're going to experience it, right? Especially in the last days. And so I guess what you're saying is that the work of decolonization is to acknowledge that God is moving in other spaces, unexpected spaces, but also with us ourselves. Like, we can through having a relationship with God ourselves, we can discern a Dave album, how it might inspire us. I'm not saying to go out and listen to like death metal, occultic rock, but
Hey,
sorry, well, don't know about the occult bit.
But I think it's really about recognizing that God doesn't need to speak to me in every single way, but God can speak in every single way, and that's the point. So if somebody is in that place where what they're listening to is death metal and occultic rock, and this sounds crazy, like, if God has to, God can use that. That's the point.
I feel very uncomfortable here.
Hey, come on, listen. I was at Friedenthal, not Friedenthal. I was schooled in Toivelina. I was in Toivelina years ago, doing a week of prayer. Toivelina is one of our schools in Finland, everybody, one of our Adventist schools. I was having problems. I was having problems with my laptop, and somebody said, "Oh, just take it to so-and-so's room." You know what I mean? Take it to so-and-so's room. Anyway, I took it to so-and-so's room, knocked on the door, pure noise behind there. Anyway, he's opened up the door and he's like, it's like real heavy. And he was like, he said, oh, Pastor Eddie. He said, oh, if you can just hear the spirit moving in this song. And he was doing to that what I would do to Fred Hammond. He was having in that moment the same experience with that music that I would have with Fred, that I would have with gospel music. And in that moment, I was like, all right then, okay. And so to Johnathan's point, Listen, God is showing up where God is showing up.
But can I
And
just
God is showing up through what God is showing up. I don't have the cultural lens.
Sure.
And I don't have the cultural framework to look at his music and say, "No, man, God no in that, man. No, man, a devil business. God no." I don't have that.
I just want to be clear. Was the death metal having gospel lyrics?
Listen, I don't know what the lyrics were. I knew what the music sounded like.
Oh,
All I can do is just look at the experience that he was having. And it was the genuine and akin experience to if he was coming in, if he would open up my door and I was listening to like, "We're blessed in the city, we're blessed." He was having the same experience.
Well, then it must have been gospel lyrics. And not to label
To be
the point.
fair,
Not to label the point. Not to label the point.
To be fair, like, you know, the label occult was put before.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, occultic guys, we can all agree that is not.
But you have to clarify that just because something is rock or metal, it doesn't automatically make it occult.
I know. Thank you.
You know what I mean?
What's going to happen is Johnathan and Eddie are both going to get some cut, and you're going to end up on one of those, you know.
Of course we are, man. Of course we are.
If I'm going to get cut, let me get cut with this story as well.
It's not going to happen.
Go
for it, Johnathan.
But I think one of the most important stories for me in the Bible, just thinking about this, is there's a story in 1 Kings 13, which is under the title "The Man of God from Judah," and it's about a prophet who goes to Israel and he prophesies against Israel and says that, you know, God's going to destroy it or whatever, and God has told him to go straight back home, and he's on his way home, and this other old prophet from Israel comes to him. And while he's on his way home, says, "Look, you got to come to my house. I've heard about what you've done. It's been amazing. You need to come to my house." And he says to him, "No, I've been told to go straight home." And the old prophet says to him, "Well, actually, I'm a prophet. God spoke to me and God told me you've got to come." So he goes with him to his house. And when he gets to his house, God actually speaks to the old prophet who brought him to his house and says to the one who had come from Judah, through the old prophet who lied to him, "You disobeyed God, so you're not going to make it home." And so he leaves and he gets killed by a lion, and they leave his donkey. And then the old prophet who really set him up and put him in this situation then goes out, brings his body back. Like, the lion doesn't touch him. It doesn't kill him. It doesn't punish him for whatever he did or whatever he contributed to getting this man killed. And I think for me, that's really a story which talks about, like, it's always confused me. How is it that God can work through someone who just lied and then got someone else who was following God in trouble? But I think it says something about how God works.
Yeah.
And I think that's the really important thing, recognizing that God does what he wants, and God works in ways that he wants. And as we've talked about with Jesus meeting the least of these, if God is going to meet everybody, he needs to be with everybody. But, and I think this is where I probably get a bit, like, that doesn't mean that I'm equipped to be with everybody, because I'm not.
Got it, yeah.
And that's the balance. There are certain skills and abilities and places that I can go and that I'd be useful. And there are other places where I wouldn't be useful at all. But it's recognizing that God finds people to be useful everywhere, and that's what it's really about.
Definitely. And in the work of decolonizing, I think it's really important to if you're a young person watching this, or anyone, to partner with people in doing the work. Don't just go on a solo effort in that journey, because you can end up doing, you know, listening and being in places that, or reading things or what have you, that may be really unhealthy for your spiritual journey. Valerie.
Yeah, Johnathan's story. I don't know how to resolve that story in my head. But one of the things that I'm learning is that a lot of the accounts in the Bible, they're multi-dimensional lessons for us to understand. And that's why the scriptures are so amazing. And you can keep going back, and seeing the obvious and then the less obvious and the less obvious. But one of the things that I'm discovering is that these stories also underpin laws that we don't understand. It's a bit like scientists discovering there's laws in the universe, and then scientists come along and they begin to frame those laws, and then other scientists off the back of shoulders, on the back of shoulders. They then do more, what they call it, the inductive method, isn't it? And then they do more, and they discover more, and they discover more. And I believe that with the scriptures, it's that kind of engagement with this wisdom that we need, not just this is what we believe as a denomination, and we're going to compete with the next denomination, and then they will compete with the next denomination, and we just freeze our understanding of the scriptures. But I think we have a responsibility to keep digging, and this links with colonization as well. So you might be thinking, where's she going with this?
Not at all.
So as we dig into the scriptures and see the possibility that God, he gave the 10 commandments, but with it's a framework to understanding subsidiary and deeper laws that are at work, just like the law of sowing and reaping, which is in nature, which is just evident everywhere, and the manifestations. When you sow this, you sow apple seed, you're going to get, all of that. There are things going on, and maybe that story reveals that somehow, that those laws are at work, right? What I do want to then add to that is the task of decolonization is so important getting rid of the denigrative aspects of colonization, primarily, first and foremost, getting rid of the denigration and bringing that to prayer and bringing that into practice and discipleship, discipline. It's so important for releasing the child of God and people in our families, for releasing them from the covenants that have been set up because of empire. And the Bible does talk about empire. The spirit of empire is being revealed through all these different stories, and even the extent to which we want to control each other's narratives. This is it. It doesn't fit into our little paradigm. So we want to control that. We're socialized to express the spirit of empire, and this is dangerous. This is dangerous, and the Bible is revealing that right from Genesis to Revelation. Right, God is dealing with empires, but there are covenants, there are contracts that are set up in, and if you've got people who loathe themselves, which is one of the impacts of colonization, and we've been talking about it in maybe not in such an aggressive way. When I say loathe, it's just such a terrible sounding word, but to self-loathe because you've been told that you are less than, and you can't. How do you accept that Christ, the love of Christ, if you're struggling with self-loathing and loathing people from your own community? These are dangerous covenants and contracts that we have to begin to bring to the cross. We have to, this is a violation that God will not accept. And it's that level of understanding. I see Gifford nodding. So
I've just brought Gifford in because I can see Gifford wants to say something to it. So please go ahead, Gifford.
No, yeah, in affirming the work that Val does, the decolonizing work amongst African descended women, that's work in the trenches, that's work on the margins, and it's very difficult and it's a hard slog, because often when you work in colonized spaces to decolonize, people who look on don't understand what you're doing, and in their ignorance they condemn, they ignore, they themselves marginalize and thereby recolonize that space. And instead of they recolonize the decolonizing process. And so in saying that, it's important when we do this work, and as we do this work, because everyone in this room is engaged in some kind of decolonizing activity, to recognize also that decolonization does not only emancipate the colonized, it emancipates the colonizer as well. I remember Nicodemus coming to Jesus at night, and Nicodemus being the ruler of a ruler of the Sanhedrin, in many ways an oppressive body of, albeit leaders of the church. And he came to Jesus because he recognized the decolonizing activity that Jesus was doing. And Jesus said something that I think is the secret to the decolonizing work, because in that moment, Jesus decolonized the colonizer. Jesus said, you've got to be born of water and of the Spirit. The Spirit is the agent of decolonizing, because the Spirit moves in liminal spaces, in in-between spaces, in the spaces that we call grey, between black and white. And that's where the work really needs to be done. And when it is being done, I think we will not just see grey, we will see it in colours as well, because it's a beautiful thing to allow the agency of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, to work and do the work of decolonizing. And I think this is why God does what he does in different places at different times, because he can and we can't. And it's not for us necessarily to be able to do a lot of what God does, but to simply be open to what God can do in our little corner, the little corner that we occupy. And so I echo also the words that Johnathan gave, because part of our challenge as church leaders in this room is to enable the threshing space for our young people, especially, to just to breathe and to share and to talk and to express themselves, but to do so in the power of the Spirit, to do it in the Spirit. And that's not always easy, because it takes a different kind of listening, a different kind of articulation. And here I'm going to invoke something. It's Toni Morrison's. So Toni Morrison wrote this book, Beloved. It's a powerful book. I read it. I've read it several times, and I'm still reading it. And towards the end of the book, Baby Suggs, one of the characters in the book, calls everyone to this space. It's a threshing space where it's a clearing space in the woods, and she asks everyone to hold hands together as they stand in a circle in this clearing space in the woods. And this was a very much, and these were enslaved or post-enslaved people, or probably even enslaved, some of them. And then Toni Morrison mentions this phrase. She says, "In the beginning was the sound." She doesn't say in the beginning was the word as we know it, and she does know the Bible, but she says in the beginning was the sound, and that speaks volumes to me, because it's the sound that makes the word, right? But it's the spirit in the sound that gives interpretation, that gives meaning, that gives understanding, that tells you to stay a little while, that tells you, no, it's time to go. And I think part of our challenge as leaders is to teach our young people to listen to the sound.
That's beautiful, Gifford. Thank you. Eddie, you got your hand up.
It's deep that you land there, Giff, because it's literally the point I was going to make years ago. I don't know if you remember this, Val. Val was living in Sheffield. I think I was up at the university up there doing some talks and that lot. And something was going on with me at the time. Anyway, I was over by Val's, and Val was in the kitchen. She's cooking, and I'm sitting down on this little bench in her kitchen, and I'm just, yeah, man, because I'm sick of it, Val. I'm this, and I'm going on, and I'll never forget. Val was over the cooker, and out of the cooker over the sink or whatever, and I just remember her looking over her shoulder, looking at me, and she said, "You can cry, you know, Eddie." And it broke. I just broke down. And it's to your point, Giff. I feel that our work is to listen and in the listening, tell people what to do with what they're saying. Direct them. Well, this is what you do with that pain. Well, this is what you do with that confusion. Well, this is what you do with that, and keep Jesus central to that process. Keep Jesus central to that process, so that in their reclaiming themselves or knowing what to do with this, at the end of it, as Jimmy Cliff said, all right, I can see clearly now. I can see clearly now. The rain has gone. I can see clearly now. I can see the obstacles in my way, and I think that's what we have to do. That is the work of the church. The work of the church is to actually listen, and if they don't know how to do that, admit that you don't know, and just call the people that can teach you to know how to do that, to help you do that.
That is so, because our question to wrap up was like, what encouragement do we give to the church in the UK to go through this work of decolonizing? But Eddie, if you're saying it is to listen, that almost made me exhale, because anything else feels like another job, another real task. But listening feels really approachable and manageable and human. Like, what would it be like to have spaces where we don't have so many sermons and so many Sabbath school lessons, but we actually create spaces just listen. Just listen. How much would that set some people free to just be heard in a space that has so much
in the
power?
listening to one of the points that Johnathan made, which was so brilliant, to realize you're not going to have an answer. In the Bible, God don't even give you an answer. So what answer are you looking for? Yeah, God ain't giving you no answer to that. Gifford used to always talk about that. No, all God is giving you right now is tension. Yeah, that's all he's leaving you with, tension. So feel the tension. Yeah, feel the tension. Further on, you'll work it out, and just listening, not to find an answer, just listening. And sometimes, all right, there ain't no answer to that. So, all right, how do we be?
And
How do we be?
that's what leads us to Christ and to prayer. Like, most of the times I'm praying because I ain't got no answers. All I can be is in the presence of God and speak to the Father that loves me. And I think when we have so many answers, we stop going to Christ. We stop praying meaningful, open-hearted prayers. We're just doing this really weird recital, performative stuff, right? So if that is our call to leadership, go for it, Stephen.
Yeah, I'd just add that, listening is, I think listening is the main tool in decolonization. That's the main one. It's listening that counters the legacy, so to speak, of colonial Christianity, and which colonial Christianity speaks at people. Decolonization listens to people, and we hear their stories, and that's what forms the reality. Colonial Christianity is not the reality.
Yeah,
which is why I think it's important in like the letter that James writes, be quick to listen, be slow to speak. We're very fast at speaking. We're very fast at it. We need to maybe sometimes learn to shut up, and we need to learn to actually listen to people's stories, and that will inform what actually the reality on the ground is. And I think Jesus really promotes that lesson of faith from the ground up. I'm pretty much convinced that was Jesus's ministry from the get-go, was it's faith from the ground up, not from the temple down.
Yeah. It's just it's a real it almost feels like we need to put pause on what we're doing and start again. And we had that through COVID. And what did we do? We went back to doing everything we've ever done before, which highly infuriated me. But I think having been in pastoral, serving in a pastoral context and trying my best to lead churches, I think it's really hard to meaningfully listen in a way that isn't performative, because you want to hear, but there's an agenda that you have to get through. And it's somehow like not prioritizing that agenda, whether it be from, and some of the agendas are well-meaning, but actually we can't keep perpetuating. And what was the word? Colluding. I'm going to use that word all the time now, Val. Colluding with this thing, this beast, because it's destructive. It's destructive in a way that I don't think people really acknowledge. I always use my mum. My mum, I won't say her age because she will kill me, but my mum is of a particular generation, and COVID was the first time that my mum did not step into a church consistently on a Sabbath. And she would say that it's when she really met the Holy Spirit. And she finds that mind blowing. And from that, she went from a very busy, big church to a much smaller, community focused church where she goes now. And there's two reasons for that. I was really ill. And so it was an insane time for us as a family. My dad also had a stroke and became paralyzed. It was insane, not just COVID, there was other things going on. But I think she even acknowledges that if it was church going time, she may have been so busy with the colluding and the performance that she wouldn't have actually been still enough to really experience the tension and the comfortability of what we were going through as a family and actually meet the Holy Spirit, find her in it. And I find being an observer and being in the audience of my mum's life has been transformed. To watch that happen to a very West Indian, pretty conservative Christian, to watch her transform outside of being in the institution every week just showed me how damaging to her spirit church going was in a way. She may not say it as harshly as I have put it. And I'm not saying church going isn't necessary. I love the church. I absolutely love going to church personally. But it is that participating in the unhelpful parts of the institution that reduces your humanity, which my mum experienced beautifully being revived during COVID. Johnathan.
Yeah, sorry, two things, and you're just going to get me on my hobby horse. But I guess firstly, in my opinion, everyone should stop going to church.
Say that what now?
Everyone should stop going to church.
Sorry, sir.
That's a whole.
Brother, they putting slices and slices.
You're gonna be on that.
No, but I'll say it very quickly.
Quick, fix it.
What we do on a Sabbath should be worship. You should be the church. Church isn't somewhere you go. But secondly, I was really interested in what you said, and I don't know if you said it on accident, well, by accident or on purpose.
Yeah.
You said your mom slowed down and the Holy Spirit found her.
No, it was intentional.
She didn't find the Holy Spirit. And I think that's the really big point, that it's recognizing, and I think that's one of the things we have to unlearn from colonialism and maybe even from our Adventism. Like the response, like God is at work outside of us. And I think we keep telling ourselves that God's only at work with us. And that's the point. It's about slowing down and recognizing, and it comes back to him listening, really beginning to think about what is God saying, what is God doing, because he was doing this before I was around, and he will still be doing this after I'm gone. And I think that's the wider point. So it's not my responsibility, and I might get in trouble for this, to finish the work. Like, my responsibility is to make sure I'm listening and seeing where God is working and following in that. And that is the really important thing.
I got up from my seat because I wanted to find a book, but I don't know where it is. It's oh no, it wasn't that. It was actually,
while you're finding it, let me read something to whatchamacallit, Michael Eric Dyson, can you hear me now? To Jonathan's point, he says, in this era of global relations, God may be outsourcing the pursuit of justice, truth, and goodness to those who aren't religious, but who are willing to do the work.
Oh.
And, that has always been a really I use that quote all the time when I'm thinking about how we talk about church and how we talk about what the church does, and talking about actually how God is moving independent of everything and every assumption that we have of how God is supposed to be moving.
Can you please send me that book personally? But this is, I was
sorry.
I actually do read, guys. It's not just Stephen Hulbert that reads all the books. But this is Tihi, one of our own. This is his PhD work towards Adventism version of Communio Ecclesiology, which is a load of very heavy words. But essentially, it's about how the what I love about this book, I should say, is it helped me to find articulation for exactly what you said, Eddie, from the book from Eric Dyson, which is the Holy Spirit is working outside of the institutions like it has to, because if it just depends on us, we're finished out here. That is not how Tihi puts it. He uses much better words, but it's a really, for anyone who wants to read about the Holy Spirit and how it works in an Adventist context and any context, this one is just speaking to our denomination. I really enjoyed reading it. But we have gone way over our time. So I do want to say thank you for those who have listened. Thank you for those who are in the chat and have shared questions so we can answer them all. But in closing, I wanted to just ask this question. What advice could we give to, I'm going to say young person, prioritize young people because we're on their platform, but this could apply to anyone. If anything has touched you, have you realized you're a colluder? Maybe you're a colonizer still. What practical advice can we give for this journey of decolonizing our mindsets, our views, and especially those amongst the young people who God is calling into leadership? It's really hard to lead in our context. I won't say any more about that, but it is really hard. The country, we live in a very secular world, the UK, all of the stuff above that I've said. But God is calling young people to lead our church of the future if he doesn't come back tomorrow. And I think this work really needs to happen. And maybe we haven't done a very good job of it corporatively, but there is stuff that individuals can do. So what practical advice can we give? Oh.
Okay, I'll say something. I'll say something. So, I would say get in contact with people like myself, who's engaged in developing and running courses around decolonization, because it does provide a route to a safe space to have those kind of conversations, but in an informed way. In a scholarly way, but not too heavily scholarly, but in a way that is useful. So I'm sure Gifford does the same kind of, so those contact us, I should say. But in terms of women, maybe they will want to get hold of me. But I'm working with Alison Awuku on a course. We've developed a course specifically looking at decolonization. So it's just to put that out there.
Will that be in person? When is it going to happen? How do we find out more? Please say more.
Well, it's finished. The course we finished developing it, but so possibly in the new year.
Okay.
But people can contact me via yourself.
All right.
Whatever, and then they can get hold of me if they want to have that conversation with me.
Perfect. That sounds great. That's something very, very practical.
Big things are gone.
Are there any books that anyone could recommend as a place to start? I mean, I've just been reading Akala's, it's not a religious text, but I've been reading Akala's Natives recently, and I found it a really good and broad, and it's very much from a UK Caribbean perspective, which I felt was really, really helpful. And actually, yeah, it's really made me want to read so much more. So that's a book that I've read recently that's been really helpful. Anyone got any maybe Christian text or written from religious writers?
There are so many books available. But you just have to be intentional with what you're seeking.
Yeah.
So, and if you want to look at, theology from the Chinese context, there's I got a really cool one musings with Confucius and Paul. Oh, you can't see it because I got the blur on.
Okay.
But and that's Chinese Christian theology. How often do we come across that in the Western world? And like, I've never come across it before, and then I came across this, which led me down a rabbit hole of a whole bunch of other books. But it's a whole world that I hadn't even thought of thinking about.
Mm.
And we're on we're more connected than ever as a global humanity.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to listen to people's stories across the world.
Yeah. More than ever
No
before.
one has had that opportunity before. Like, we are so blessed right now to be able to hear more stories than we could ever have hoped to have heard.
Yeah.
And so that goes for theology
Yeah.
as well.
And I think, just to add to that, that when you read more and you expose yourself to more, God's calling in your life almost gets more magnified, because your heart starts to beat for certain things. Your mind starts to run, and you think, actually, I've got a real heart for this particular thing. For Val, it's women from the African diaspora and singleness, and it's been other things. And I think that's why it's so important to do it with the Lord, to expect Christ to set you alight for something in restoring humanity until Jesus comes back, right?
I've just started reading a book, like literally this evening. I started reading a book called Christ in the Rubble, faith and the Bible and the genocide in Gaza, by a Christian Palestinian pastor, Munther Isaac. And the world, so many Christians are surprised to find out that we have Palestinians who are Christian.
Yeah.
What does Christianity look like from their perspective? Living under the colonial occupation that they find themselves in. What does that look like for them? What does their theology look like? Have we even asked that question?
Yeah.
And you can go across the globe asking that question. Like, Native Americans, what's your theology as a Native American Christian? Like, how do you see God? How does that relate to your culture, your traditions, the things that you've grown up with? Like, we need to ask those questions, because that it opens our eyes to seeing God through a different lens, and
it makes God more beautiful and just more extraordinary. It really does.
It's very real.
It really does. Johnathan, you got your mic off, so I just assumed you wanted to say something.
Oh, well, no, I was just thinking. So I won't recommend any books, because I think other people have recommended lots of books. But what I will say is, find and spend time with people who will engage with your questions rather than shutting them down. I think that's a really important thing. So, because questioning isn't bad, and it isn't a lack of faith or anything like that. And so some of these questions need to be asked, and I think that's a massive part of the process of decolonization. And even in talking about decolonization, we serve a God who can meet you in your questions, and I think that's a really important thing for people to recognize and understand.
Yeah. Forever the pastor, Johnathan Holder. If nobody has anything else to add.
I was just going to say, I think it's in 2 or 3 weeks' time, on a Tuesday evening, I'm going to be running a podcast for some young people who are asking questions of the Bible, such as the scramble for Canaan, and how do we...
for Canaan, did you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
And if there's any young people that might be interested in that, if they can contact me directly, or even through you, Lolly, be happy to
DM me, guys. DM me on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll redirect you. I'll be the assistant.
Can I just say to the people who are in the chat who have actually asked the same question around, colonization in the Bible, and, as it were, the scramble for Canaan, here you are. Gifford Rhamie is going to be on a podcast. Follow him, and so that you can get so that you can listen to the conversation. And so some of the questions that weren't answered in the chat can be answered in this, hopefully answered in this podcast.
Gifford, where would the podcast be held? Is it on your socials? Is it on a particular church? You're muted.
Yes, it will be on my socials because it's a private thing. It's not a public thing.
They need to contact you to get
They
access.
would need to, yeah.
Okay. All right. We love that.
It was driven by a couple of young people,
Mhm.
and so I'm taking the liberty to open it up a bit. Yeah.
Great. I love that. So there you go. We've got two very practical spaces that you can be with Val or with Gifford. Some books there and some guidance about speaking to people that you trust to hold your questions, even if they can't answer them. It's been a really great conversation. I'm going to take away that I'm a colluder. That's my takeaway. Any other colluders out there? Let's have Colluders Anonymous. Try and sort ourselves out. But also I think it's very apparent that there's a lot of work to be done, but actually it's really exciting because there's so many beautiful ways that we can transform the spaces that we worship and the spaces that we serve. There's so much that God can use us to do, and that's what excites me. Like, yes, it's a big task, yes, it's a very heavy one, but I'm sure there's people that are inspired not to just be worthily, upset and angry about it, but also to turn that into something meaningful and to make to progress the church and to make something beautiful out of something that was so awful, I think is what I've really got from this evening. So thank you for everyone who sent questions in. Sorry if we couldn't answer them all, but I really hope that you found it encouraging and meaningful and caused more tension to sit in, which is a good thing. And more than anything, I just encourage you to take your questions, not just to others, but also take them to the Lord, because I found in my own life that God is pretty chatty and he likes to talk and he likes to guide and lead. And he's the safest pair of hands. God is the safest pair of hands to be in. So on that note, have a wonderful Sabbath for those who are Sabbath keepers. And if you're from another denomination, have a wonderful weekend and enjoy your services wherever you are. And maybe we'll do an episode 3. We need a producer because, as you can see from every time we start, I have a technical madness. So if any young person on a Friday night wants to help produce this, please contact me.